More and more people are having trouble with the cross as violence, as divine child abuse. And you've actually worked on this problem.
Yeah. I've always been fascinated by the cross. It is the center of the faith, but this issue, I think one of the biggest things to remember is that it's not the Father and the Son separately doing things or one doing something to the other. God, the Son, is God, right? God the Father is God. God the Son is God. God the Holy Spirit is God. And so when we see the Son going to the cross, it's not just God doing something to this human Son. This is the God-man taking on the cross heroically himself. The one God has one will, which is the will to save sinners justly and mercifully at the same time in the cross. And so one of the most important things is just looking at Jesus on the cross and not imagining that this is some helpless victim. It's not. Mm-hmm. This is actually the Lord of the universe willingly, joyfully, even though painfully, going in his own sovereign will to the cross. He says in John 10, I take my I lay my life down.
No one takes it from
No
me.
one takes it from me. I lay it down. And that's why the Father loves me. The Father loves me precisely because I willingly lay down my life. And so it's not something imposed on him, a will imposed on him in that sense. It's something he takes up willingly for our sakes. And so it's important that we not downplay Jesus, the Son's agency in this
Right.
moment, because his agency
He's not a victim.
He's not a victim in that sense. No, his agency is not distinct from the agency of the Father in willing the cross. And so that's really important in understanding that. And when you start to see that, you see it's not just the Father's sacrifice of the Son, it's God's self-sacrifice in the Son. And that casts the whole thing in another light.
Don't you think too that this the reason why this is especially asked in our day is because we become very sensitive, understandably, to violence of all kinds of different stripes. We see violence perpetrated around the world. Any minute we check out the news and find out what's going on in the world. So we're very sensitized to violence, and almost any kind of violence is bad, whereas, of course, that's not true. There is appropriate violence. There's the violence that disallows a mass murderer to go into a theater and shoot everybody up. There's the kind of violence that coerces a thief to put down his gun. So there is a coercive, even violent kind of activity that isn't wrong, that isn't sinful, but is actually just. And isn't that the category we're talking about here? Where yes, there is a satisfaction of justice being made here, but it's not as if there is a disproportionate use of power. The Son, who with the Father demands justice to be done, takes it himself.
Yeah, two things on that. For some folks, it's even helpful to distinguish between kinds of force and say, unjust force is violence, but just force, you may not even want to call it violence. Maybe you just realize that when God acts forcefully in that way, it's not unjust because God could never be unjust. God is perfect and holy in all of his works and his ways. And so there's a distinction between, the violence of human sinners and the justice of God, the just punishment, like you said, the just satisfaction of God. And the other thing is just, again, to reemphasize the fact that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are always working together, one will, in all that is done. And so the justice of God being satisfied
Is
in the
the
cross
Son's
is the
justice.
Son's justice.
Yeah.
He wills this.
Right.
We think about the Lord's Prayer. Jesus, the first thing he has us pray for is, hallowed be thy name. Let the world recognize the holiness of your name. And the holiness and the display of God's holy name takes place in the cross. Jesus wanted more than anything that God's name would be seen as perfect and just and righteousness, and therefore no longer passing over sins as he did in the past, like it says in Romans 3. And so this is what Jesus wants. Jesus' zeal for God's name is at stake.